feelings on divisive debates. Very excited tonight. I have Yogev returning here with us in the studio. A lot has happened since our last conversation, and we're going to rehash some of the things we talked about before, and then talk about some of the exciting news that has taken place recently and some of the small victories that our activism, we feel like, has started to win. So Yogev, welcome back. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience with anti-Semitism and your experiences with activism on behalf of Palestine as a Jewish man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I, as a Jewish farmer, farming and connection with the land is one way that I practice and embrace my Jewish tradition and heritage. And what that looks like for me on my farm is practicing ancient agricultural wisdom and following like the laws of agricultural practice include like giving my land a year of rest. There's a principle where the edges of the fields belong to those who are poor. So I donate and give back to my community. And it connects with my activism too, because I feel like for me, Judaism and practicing my Jewish tradition, it's a way of life. It's following a moral code, and that goes deep in my family, all the way back to, I know with my great-grandmother in Chicago, she was a labor organizer, an anti-racist organizer. She worked with the Black community to uplift them and fight for their rights, and also was a volunteer with an Asian American cultural organization, and instilled those values on my father and also my uncle who participated during the lunch counter sit-ins with John Lewis and got arrested for Black liberation, for civil rights here in the United States. And so that's carried with me and helped me find my way in my life. And I feel like I'm carrying on the work of my ancestors in my activism and my connection to the land.
And, you know, that's something that I think a lot of people, a lot of Americans don't realize is the history, the rich history of Jewish activism in many different movements. Just in the last century alone, there were a lot of Jewish activists who were heavily involved in the civil rights movement. There was a lot of Jewish activists that were heavily involved in ending apartheid in South Africa. And I think that all of those people, especially in the last century, really get overlooked a lot because it kind of goes against the general flavor of Zionism and the relentless propaganda we've had for the last 75 years. You know what I mean? I do. I feel like people miss that a lot. They miss that side of the Jewish story and experience over the last 100 years. Having known you now the time that I have and the things that I've seen you involved in and doing, it doesn't surprise me at all of learning that you come from that tradition.
To add to that, as a marginalized people, as a displaced people, when I look at the Jewish tradition of what it means to follow that moral code, I think it was summed up best by Rabbi Hillel, who he's got a lot of good quotes. I'll share one story of his where there was somebody critiquing, trying to understand, this Torah and all the teachings of Judaism seem so complex, and like, can you put it into real life? Can you tell me how I can really understand this and do it in a way where quick enough where if I'm standing on one foot, you can teach me it before I got to put my foot down. And Rabbi Hillel did that. He said, that which is hateful to you, do not do to others. That is the summary of all of Torah, and the rest is all commentary. And in that, when I follow that, it's the Christian values of loving your neighbor is also in the Jewish tradition. And I think about marginalized people, we can turn against each other, and then the oppressor is able to subjugate and hold power more strongly, or we can work together and see collective liberation that I don't think Israel will ever experience peace and justice until we have peace and justice in Palestine. And so my liberation is connected to the liberation of all of humanity. And as long as there's oppressed people anywhere, then I have work to do. And it was in college that I realized that, because I think that If you are familiar with Rachel Corrie and her story, I think that when you see somebody who is being oppressed, who you can connect with and identify, I think that's what's really key, and what's sometimes it's easy to marginalize and dismiss the death and genocide of Arabs if we don't see ourselves in their story. And for me, as somebody from the United States, it was really compelling, the story of Rachel Corrie, because here is a United States citizen who stood for justice, who said, no, I am going to put my privilege and my body on the line to stand up for what is right. And so she stood in front of a bulldozer in Rafah in southern Gaza 21 years ago, and blocked to protect that home. And the bulldozer, operated by the IDF, ran her over and murdered her. And that really hit me hard. And I remember sharing that with my father at the time, who he was really supporting Israel. And that kind of helped him understand things from different perspectives and helped him develop. And it's like, for me, I also see there's a soldier, an Israeli soldier who died this week, who has my same name, who doesn't look that different from me, who's a little younger than me. His name is Yogev Von. And a month before he was killed in Gaza, he posted to his friends and he said, there is no justice that will come out of this war. And so I want to carry those stories as well into this conversation and say that I think across the spectrum, Israelis, Jewish Americans, Palestinian Americans, Christians, like, we can all come together for peace, whether we have marginalized identities ourselves or we see the suffering of others. We all have a responsibility to act.
And see, that's what I struggle with a whole lot within my faith and my faith family. Being a Christian here in the Bible Belt in the South, the flavor of Christianity that we have here, dispensationalism and rapture theology are so deeply ingrained into people's worldviews that the situation with Israel, it makes perfect sense to just ignore all the atrocities happening and simply look at it as, this is fulfillment of prophecy. These things have to come to pass. This is just how it is. War is ugly. It's unfortunate, but this is, the things that I hear from my fellow Christians to justify this stuff, it's insane. Not just because, as somebody who spent years of my life, like, just genuinely trying to read the Bible to see what it says and not look at it through the lens of what I think it already says. By doing that, most of the things that I was taught in a fundamentalist Southern church growing up, all of those frameworks just really crumbled. Everything about our religion, everything about Judaism and Christianity and Islam too, but we'll just focus on these two for the moment. Everything about it is about being in tune with God and in love and community with the people around you. Everything about it is about being a good steward of this world, of the land, of the people, of everything that we had dominion over, being good stewards of those. And in Christianity here, a lot of that has been turned into kind of an imperialist spin on it. And we don't realize today how much our Christianity here in America is influenced by imperialism. And the ways that imperialism hijacked Christianity in many ways, in many different places, at many different times, as a guise to go in and land grab and take places over and subjugate people, and doing it all under the guise of spreading the gospel, of spreading civilization to the heathens. And so many of those concepts are still just like baked into the way that we think. I was a freshman when 9/11 happened in high school, and everything that was said about Islam from that point on was absolutely horrific. The picture that was painted from that moment on in all the media I consumed, video games, movies, like everything, Muslims are always portrayed in a bad light. They're always fanatics. They're always, they just want to kill anybody who's an infidel or whatever. You know, you get that whole mindset. And then one day you actually meet some Muslims and you get to know them as people on an individual level. And all of that stuff just starts to fall away. It's like, man, y'all are nothing like what I thought you were. I think a lot of that is happening now within Christianity and Judaism. I mean, the entire concept of the nation of Israel being the Jewish nation, it represents all Jews all over the world. That is really crazy when you zoom in at all on Judaism, because there's so many different perspectives and so many different schools of thought and so many different people. Judaism has transcended across many different cultures, races, all of those things throughout the centuries. So now when you have this country that is committing atrocity after atrocity and doing it in the name of all Jews, I've heard so many prominent Jewish activists and authors and historians and everything in the last year that I have followed that have all repeatedly talked about how the rise in anti-Semitism in the world is really more attributed to Israel than Israel being a refuge from the anti-Semitism in the world. Because all Jews now are judged by everything that this nation does, whether right or wrong. And that is a dangerous thing. Like, even as an American, I got a million criticisms about America. I have a million criticisms about American leaders. I have a million criticisms about the things we have done all over the world. And I know that there are people around the world that if they ever came across me and knew that I was American, they're going to be thinking about all of those things that I have issues with too. But I'm an American. They represent me. So when I think about that, like on a bigger scale for Jewish people, that you could live here in America your whole life and have never been to Israel, have nothing to do with it or anything. But just because you're Jewish and all of this propaganda is pushed out constantly, that equates who you are with this nation and what they're doing. I mean, that makes no sense on any level when you really break it down.
I appreciate the way you frame that, because what I'm hearing from that, and I think why this is important, a conversation we're having, because I speak to a Jewish perspective and hearing your Christian perspective, it sounds like at the core of where the values as Jewish and Christian values really lie is not in alignment with how you put it, the propaganda that's teaching us that Arabs are just terrorists and that we must fear them and so forth. And that really speaks to me, because when I look at my life journey around it, and you asked me about anti-Semitism in my own life, it's my family is from Eastern Europe, Hungary and Galatia is a country that no longer exists. But as a displaced people, my ancestors fled Eastern Europe because of anti-Semitism. This was long before the Holocaust and settled in the United States. And when I think about that history, then like the stories that I have of my great grandmother who stood for peace and justice, she also had a love for Israel, because as a displaced people, she used to tell my father that no matter what's going on in the world, that Jews will always have a place where they can go. And for thousands of years of being a people of refugees, there is no more Jewish refugees anywhere in the world, because anyone can go to Israel. And to see what Israel has become is not the vision that I think my great-grandmother had. To displace and oppress another people does not bring security and safety. And I want to share, this is a song composed by my great-grandmother called Israeli Lullaby. And in this song, composed many decades ago, she's speaking at a time of violence in the Middle East. And she has a prayer of hope in there that says that despite, at this time where across the sea there is a land where blood is mixing with the sand, she ends with, But there will come another day when peace will rule this land, and there will be another boy to play upon that sand. So go to sleep and have no fear, for you are safe tonight. And I know who my great-grandmother was because of what she did for the Black and Asian American community in Chicago and how she stood up for justice. And I feel like she would be standing right beside me today as somebody saying, we can be critical of the state of Israel, the government has lost touch with what our values as a people and our tradition truly is by the genocide and displacement of the Palestinians. And I see that connection with Christianity too. The way that I was taught how to connect with Jewish tradition is through my own experience. As I read Torah, I look at my own life and I consider, what do I need to learn and how do those stories apply to me? And there's another great quote by Rabbi Hillel that if you do not stand for something, then what are you? If you do not stand for yourself, then who will? And if not now, when? And to me, that's a call to action to stand for what we believe in. And I see you doing that with your Christian values. And sometimes it's not an easy road. I'm curious what your experience has been like. It's been really empowering to work with you, with our Muslim brothers and Christian and Jewish brothers together with the Appalachian Peace Education Center, which is a community where we respect our differences and can unite on a common ground. Has that been your experience generally in the Christian community as you've been navigating these complex issues?
So my experience in the Christian community has been depressing, to say the least. So you got to understand about me anyways. For those of you that don't know my story, I spent a decade in prison. I was a smart kid, did good in school. Like everybody thought I was going to college. Instead, I got caught up in the wrong things. I started selling drugs, and not long after I left high school, I ended up in prison. I spent 9 years, 3 months, and 7 days incarcerated. And while I was in there, I made up my mind early on, this ain't for me. This ain't how I want to spend my life. I'm better than this. I know I can do better than this. And so I dedicated my time to educating myself. And prison is a very unique place in a lot of ways. But one of the ways that it can be beneficial, I'm of the mindset that what makes a person wise is that they're able to make use of their sufferings. And that's what I tried to do. But when you're in prison, you are surrounded by every kind of person you can imagine. I've met people from all walks of life. I've met people from all kinds of different nationalities, cultures, beliefs. It's engaging in conversation and even some friendly theological debate and stuff with people with differences in how they believe and differences in perspectives, and sometimes differences in entire religions. You would be amazed at what you start to learn about yourself and your own faith and what you do and don't know yourself. I started realizing that there were all kinds of questions I couldn't answer about the Bible, even though that I had grown up going to church. And so it was me in the process of trying to find the answers to these questions I couldn't answer, or I hear an idea about some kind of doctrine that's kind of contrary to something I used to believe. And I want to dig into it and find the truth. Years of me doing this and just trying to really understand why I believe what I believe led me to the place, and it was a really hard decision to come to. It led me to a place where I had a vastly different understanding of Scripture as a whole than most people around here do. And I would venture to say that most American Christians do. And when I mentioned earlier, dispensationalism is a theological construct that didn't even exist before a couple hundred years ago. I mean, you can trace it back to a particular person and a particular movement. In Wales, you had John Nelson Darby and the Plymouth Brethren. That's where these kind of concepts began. And it was at a time when evangelism was taken to new heights, literally. I mean, you had airplanes now. You had people like Moody that was big on just going to all these different places in the world spreading the gospel. This was the type of gospel that got spread a lot during these times. And if I had to put it in a nutshell, dispensationalism basically is a belief that God dealt with different people in different ways at different periods of time. So how he dealt with the Jewish people during what they refer to as the dispensation of the law is different than how he deals with everybody since Christ that is now under the dispensation of grace, for instance. So then they have this really long eschatological framework. And if you've ever seen anybody try to explain this stuff, man, they got charts and just all these. It is crazy, man. It is crazy. There's a million books about this stuff. There's the charts, though, they really get me. Like, if you've never seen one of these end times charts that tries to compare Daniel and Revelation and like makes all these connections, and usually they're like plugging in modern country names as represented by this and this prophecy, and that's why this is happening. They always be trying to tie it to current events. I have heard 1,000 different dates that the world was going to end come from this framework. And of course, it never happens that way. But from that framework is where Christian Zionism really bloomed and blossomed from. It's not the only framework where a belief that the Jews should return to their homeland exists, okay? But it is the popular framework that has taken deep root in American society in a big way, especially Southern culture. And I say all that to say that now, since all of this has been happening in Israel since October 7th, I immediately, started trying to speak to my Christian brothers and sisters about the situation, because we're like programmed to just pray for Israel, pray for Israel, pray for Israel. Like, and thinking that all the Palestinians, they just want to wipe them out. And like all of those narratives, those exist so heavily and prominently in people's thinking that when I try to talk to my Christian brothers and sisters about it, and I try to address the bad theology behind it, it's almost, they feel like I'm attacking them as a person, because that's how deeply ingrained those beliefs are. They feel like I'm attacking their pastor that they're fond of, their grandfather or their grandmother who used to teach them about the Bible and who believed these things wholeheartedly, and I think that's a big part of the problem I've run into, is trying to get people to just listen, really, to consider. And I've tried to use the story of Palestinian Christians as much as I can to try to circumnavigate that some, because they really are. I mean, there's no way to look at their story and their history and fit it into the narrative that we have of Israel. And I find that a lot of Christians, even when you bring that up, they'll spin that into just like, well, it is very unfortunate for them, but God promised the Jews this land. So yeah, that's my experience, is just a whole lot of frustration. I have people that won't talk to me no more. I have people that just think I've gone off the rails. And those that know me know, like, I'm vicious in the debate. I am. But I don't degrade people in debates. You know what I'm saying? I don't have to attack a person's character. I'm vicious in debates because I don't debate on something I don't feel like I'm informed about. And if I'm informed about it, I'm going to tell you facts. Whether those facts go against your narrative or what the news says or whatever. Like, if I can show you receipts for something, I'm standing on that. And people just aren't used to that nowadays. So even when I try to lovingly have conversations with my Christian brothers and sisters, it often does not go as planned. People get in their feelings bad. And honestly, I'm kind of struggling here lately. It's gotten to the point that I've just kind of become jaded, and I don't have as much patience to try to do all the explaining anymore. It's like, can you not see what the whole world sees right now? Like, at some point, you have to wake up and realize that something is not adding up here with the way you think it is and what is actually playing out in reality. And I've gotten to the point now, like I've straight up checked some ministers I know and told them, like, look, you need to repent. They looking at me like, what? I'm serious. You are supporting a genocide, and I hope and pray you realize what's happening and repent before it's too late, because this is insanity. But people brought up in that dispensationalist tradition like to pick and choose things from the Old Testament and just zero in on that one scripture. And this is how it is and still applies today, and that's just it. And it's just hard, man. It's really hard both to stay loving and show grace towards people's ignorance, while still trying to stand on the truth and not back down from that. Like there's a line there somewhere. You know what I mean? There's a fine line between bashing somebody or arguing with somebody and telling them the truth in love. And with this situation, that line just becomes more and more blurred.
Thanks for sharing that. And this is episode 1 of Stats Don't Lie, Facts Over Fiction. And I think that story is going to get told, because what's happened, I think, with the Christian Zionist movement and so forth, is there's been a narrowing of the story that's been told. That's not the whole story. And I think that we see that in mainstream media, and why it's so important that this show and other people are putting the whole story out there. Because looking at what happened in Amsterdam just a couple weeks ago, if you look at just the headlines and read mainstream news articles, you might
over there persecuting Jews. What? This is crazy.
Right? And then because seeing that, okay, a mob has attacked Israelis, then that feeds into, we got to send more support, send more bombs to Israel, blow up more Palestinians. Because if that's the only story you hear, but there's more to this story, right? What really happened in Amsterdam is there were Israelis who were doing property destruction, climbing up on people's porches and ripping down Palestinian flags. The violence began.
Everybody, man. Singing songs about death to Arabs and other things that I won't repeat on here, as well as the thing for me though was the genocidal songs, like singing about why is there no more school in Gaza, because there's no more school kids in Gaza, like things like that. That's insane. You have to be a sick group of individuals to walk around singing something like that. But it was constant, and it was for days. They had the moment of silence in the stadium for the Spanish flood victims, and they all got rowdy and was yelling and stuff during that moment of silence. Just everything they did was just like to antagonize everybody around them. And a lot of the people that are part of that group come from these more extremist elements in Israel, especially within like the settler community and stuff. And there is one of the grossest senses of entitlement there that I think I've ever seen. But I mean, if you think about it, a lot of the people from these more extremist settler movements, they grow up, everything they've ever been told is about how they are God's chosen, they are special, and everybody else is out to get them. And then they experience through their life oppressing local Palestinians and doing it with the backing of military right there with them. I mean, the military oftentimes is all people from these communities that eventually they conscript and they go do their 2 years, and so it's just this cycle and a whole culture that is geared towards I'm special and can do whatever I want to anybody else. And so they believe that so much, they go to a foreign country to a sporting event and they carry on in these same ways. It's like they're back at home. And it's verified. There were IDF soldiers were amongst the crowd, former soldiers. There was Mossad agents that traveled with them. There was a Israeli newspaper article about the Mossad agents were going to travel with them because they were concerned something could happen before they even went there. So it's just crazy. You have an entire culture that they're just acting in a way that nobody could go to any city in the world and act the way these guys acted and something not happen. And for that to turn into news articles about a pogrom taking place in Amsterdam and all of this other stuff. Like, that's absolutely insane. And this is where I see so much parallel with the American story, as far as how Israel and America were founded and the things taking place. America, it was largely, you had manifest destiny. You had a spin on Christian theology.
Right.
That it is our God-given duty to take the gospel to these heathens, basically, to civilize the world. Like, we're doing them a favor by doing so. A lot of that same mindset and that same kind of spin is put on Judaism for Israelis. And I think that's also why it's so easy to manipulate Americans into supporting Israel. We have everything that we think about that's patriotic here in America is mostly myths. I mean, it really is. There's so much awful, evil history within American history. Does that make every American a bad person or anything? No. But when you even speak on those things, like I mentioned earlier with Christians and their theology, a lot of Americans, if you speak about our actual real history and the bad things we did, they take that as a personal attack. Like, you're attacking America. You're attacking. No, I'm attacking this false ideology you have about America. I'm just looking at reality. That's it. And it's the same for Israel in a lot of ways. You mentioned how your grandmother was still, I could only imagine, especially not knowing the evils that took place behind the scene to form the nation of Israel, but just it happening and being Jewish somewhere in the world, I can only imagine how that would make you feel. Like, oh my God, Israel is a country again. Like, I could go there now. And that in itself is beautiful, right? But it leaves out the reality. There is already a people there, and there is atrocities being committed against them just so you can come here. And if people knew that whole story, not everybody would be as excited about it. So they can't tell the truth. They have to lead people on with fear about anti-Semitism and that we're here for you. And wherever you are in the world, whatever happens, you can come to us. Like, that has to exist for Zionism to continue. Because when people learn the whole story, it pretty much comes down to, are you a monster or not? Because if you know the whole story and you still are okay with all of this, like, you have to be some kind of monster. You can't appreciate humanity and other people and be okay with what has been happening in Israel and Palestine for the last 75 years. And there's plenty of blame you could spread around to every group of people and point fingers here and there and all of that. But when it all boils down to it, none of these conflicts would be happening if Zionists hadn't come in 1948 and pushed out 750,000 people from their homes, and they continue that oppression ever since.
That's well put. And when you're hearing that, it makes what comes up for me is that a lot of people, we get stuck in shame and guilt if anybody's calling us out for what we interpret as getting blamed. And it's not about the blame. Yeah, it's about the responsibility. And what that looks like, I think for me, it's like I see the Middle East, like, I went through a land dispute, a land conflict myself on my own farm. And then the same month that was happening, then I go to Israel. And I'm paying attention to this land conflict and thinking about it from different dimensions. So I think bringing this conflict into my own life, it's like I see all of us, like what you're talking about with the parallels between the genocide of Native American people here in our own country. As U.S. citizens, we have a responsibility for having justice on that issue. There's that same parallel happening in Israel. So by us making the right choices and doing better for Israel and for Palestine, and what that looks like is the Appalachian Peace Education Center. We're a group of diverse people who all stand together saying, stop sending weapons. That our U.S. taxpayer dollars, we're contributing to this violence. We're supplying the weapons that are causing this genocide, and that we can heal our own issues. We can heal by taking responsibility and truly facing what is ours to face. We can not only heal ourselves, but we can heal the world. And that's my vision for the Middle East as the Holy Land, is that let's do it right and show that to the world that it's possible, so we can do that in all of our communities. I take no surprise at the fact that, like, the town that I farm in is Damascus. You know, it's like, to me, the parallels between the Holy Land and how we're living here. And another story I've heard in the media of how I think that we're twisting things for a certain narrative, and what anti-Semitism, how it's been weaponized for the justification of continuing support for Israel. In California, there is a synagogue that was doing a land auction for Palestinian land in the West Bank. And that understandably got some heat from the community who sees that as a great injustice. And
not only just an injustice, but actually illegal under international law even. And I remember that particular one. There was actually a Jewish member of the community that went to city council when he heard about this happen in the local synagogue, and he brought it to their attention. And of course, they brushed it to the side. So he took part in organizing protests to be there that day when this was going to begin. And things got heated. And then next thing I know, President Biden's talking about how it's unacceptable to have the kind of anti-Semitism take place here in America, where people are trying to prohibit Jews from going to their place of worship. No mention of why they were going there that day, what was being protested. None of that stuff even gets a mention. These are illegal settlements, and you're selling these homes that have been taken from Palestinians forcibly, and you're selling them to people here in America. Like, that is nuts. That's crazy. But I do want to backtrack for just a moment. You mentioned a minute ago the work that the Appalachian Peace Education Center has been doing. And we actually had what I think is a really big victory, even though it will seem small to most people. But in the last couple of weeks, it was in the news a whole lot. Bernie Sanders had put forth a bill to stop sending arms to Israel. And there were, what was it, like maybe 14 or 15 Democrats, I think, that voted with it.
I think as many as 19 with the 2 independents.
And then, of course, everybody else, they shot it down. But one of the people that signed on to that bill was Senator Tim Kaine from here in Virginia. When I first got connected with the Appalachian Peace Education Center early this year, I had the opportunity to hear about them as an event was taking place where a pastor had just returned from the West Bank and was sharing what he had just seen with his own eyes going on there. And there was they were already in the process. They had a face-to-face meeting. Or no, actually, it was plans to go to the trail days in Damascus because we knew Senator Kaine was gonna be there.
That's right.
And his office got wind of it and reached out and was like, instead of y'all coming and doing this, how about he just comes and sees you? You can have as many people there as you want, cameras, whatever. Like, but let's just do that so that there's no disruptions take place or whatever. And, all right, cool. So we packed the place, had plenty of people there. Multiple of you guys got to speak. I came and filmed the whole thing, but we got to engage a senator directly and tell him how we felt about arming Israel, and got to have real dialogue with him about where he stood on the issue. And he was pretty unwavering. He wasn't on the type of kick like some people are, just plain and simple. Oh, we have to support Israel. We have to support Israel. He did try to offer more nuance into why he felt the way he did and everything. And that, yeah, I do think things are getting out of hand and all of that. But at the end of the day, he wasn't about to shoot down any kind of aid to Israel. It wasn't going to happen. And then we were able to have a Zoom call with him as a follow-up. Been what, maybe 2 months now, 2 to 3 months ago? I don't even think it was that. It was right at 2 months, I think. And during that Zoom call, we even had Reverend Fadi from Palestine.
Yes.
And he had an opportunity to address Cain and tell him himself, like, how he had just been attacked in the West Bank himself within the days past, and the crazy things going on there. And we had many others that were able to chime in on that meeting, but he left with the same mindset. Yeah, I hear you, but that type of situation. But when we saw that he got on that bill and he actually did put his name in, which, politically is a scary thing to do. It is, because the whole world about to turn against you. The whole political world about to turn upside down against you if you step out against Israel. Like that's been shown time and time again. Especially this past year. I mean, you look at Jamal Bowman and that whole situation. They spent millions and millions and millions of dollars. AIPAC did, the American Israeli
Political Alliance.
Political Alliance, yes. So AIPAC spent just an ungodly amount of money to remove Jamal Bowman from his seat because of the stance he was taking for Palestine. We've seen that happen numerous times now. Cori Bush was another good example. So for him to take that stance, that was kind of a brave thing for him to do. And I appreciate that he did it. I will say it's not enough. We need more action than that. But it was satisfying to see somebody that we have been personally engaging finally take a step in the right direction.
That was a big, powerful moment for me when we packed that room. It was, if I remember correctly, in the middle of a workday for me. So I was able to come on my lunch break. And I remember I get into the room and there's 100 people there. And I'm looking around and I see Senator Cain. And I remember kind of locking in where he was. He was front and center. And 3 minutes to talk directly to a senator, I wanted to make the most of it. And so I spoke from my heart and I shared what my great-grandmother's vision was, I think, for peace and justice. And I looked him right in the eyes and I said as clearly as I could, if we keep sending bombs and we meet hate with hate and we meet violence with violence, that is a downward spiral that we know where that leads. Instead, we can choose a different path, and we are all here to call on you to choose a different path. And I am celebrating Cain for what he's done this week. And I was impressed even in that moment when he was responding to what we were saying. That was back in April 2024. I was impressed how he had the humility to admit that the United States has made this exact same mistake that Netanyahu and Israel is making today. And we've made that mistake in part when he was in government. And he voted and supported the war on terrorism. There was one lone vote of a congresswoman who voted no against starting the war on terrorism. Because when I look back at that, the two big lessons that I can see is how when you continue to bomb a people, that you're not ending a terrorist, hateful mindset, you're breeding it. When you cage a person into a hellish environment, you are creating an animal. And instead, if you give people what they need and take care of them, then we can be one, brothers and sisters in humanity. And so I try to share that message with Cain, and I feel like he was able to share that he's made mistakes himself. And that in part was from the war on terrorism. And let's learn too from the propaganda machine that was strong then, who kept saying, the weapons of mass destruction, and we need to do this for a just war. That's, I think, that lesson applies here today. And to hear Cain say that we've learned that lesson the hard way, and that when Cain had the opportunity to meet with Netanyahu, he tried to share that same advice. And he said back in April that he wasn't confident if he would want to push for a vote in Congress, because what happens if it only gets one vote?
Yeah.
But now
that really bugged me though when he said that, because I'm like, I hear you, but since when does doing the right thing require a majority to start doing? Somebody has to start that process, even if they have to step out by themselves. You know what I'm saying? So to say that you know what the right thing is, but what's the point in trying it? It's going to get shot down. I ain't trying to hear that, man.
Yeah. And he won alone. He won the one vote. You know, we had more than a dozen. And I think that locks into where now we have a growing body of people that is on this path for peace, that is on this path to do the right thing. And I cherish that moment because that's something that when I tell my grandchildren about who my great-grandmother was standing up for justice and who my uncle was who participated in the civil rights movement, I want to share my story too, to where my grandkids understand where they came from and what path that we're on.
Mm-hmm. And we mentioned this last week too about how, I mean, it's easy to look back at history and say, if I'd have been alive during World War II, if I'd have been a German when Hitler came to power, I would not have been with that stuff. If I would have been alive during the Jim Crow South, I would not have been able to treat people that same way. Like, we all look at ourselves like we would have gone against the grain if we had been there. Well, we're here right now. We're in that type of moment in history right now. Decades from now, people are going to look back and say, how did the Americans go along with all of this stuff? And I, for one, I'm going to be able to say I didn't. My kids are going to be able to say my father stood up and did what was right in the face of all the adversity, whatever, it doesn't matter. And that's the thing that I want to get out to people now is like, when are you going to start being on the right side? You know what I'm saying? Like, this whole, like, if you still just blindly believe America's the beacon of light in a dark world narrative, and we just got to go out here and spread democracy everywhere. Like, if you still believe that, you really have no grasp on history whatsoever. You may know some dates and events, but you've never really thought through history on a personal level. How, the people in these history books are not just numbers. They're not just stories. They were real people living real lives just like we are right now. And we're in that moment, man. We are in that moment. What are you going to do now? We're in the midst of Jim Crow again. What are you going to do about it? We're in the midst of Nazi Germany again. What are you going to do about it? We're in the midst of all of those types of things. We in that moment in history.
As Rabbi Hillel said, if you do not stand for something, then what do you stand for? If you do not stand for yourself, then who will, if not now, win? And the message there is what we do now matters. Don't get stuck in that blame game, because that ain't what it's about. It's about rising up to the responsibility we all have to make this world a better place.
And for Christians, that ought to be an easy concept. Like, so there's a big push with Christian nationalists to like put the 10 Commandments back in classrooms and all of this stuff. And my response to somebody is always, first of all, I think there's wisdom in separation of church and state. And I certainly do not want my children receiving spiritual lessons from just some random school teacher or something. Like, I don't trust half these pastors and stuff nowadays to teach sound doctrine to my children. I definitely don't want them trying to learn this stuff in school. You know what I'm saying? That is something for us as individuals, as families to do. So I think there's wisdom in separation of church and state. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that putting some biblical, something biblical in a classroom will have some kind of positive impact. How about we put the Beatitudes up there? How about we put the Beatitudes up in Congress and have our politicians look at every day how the meek shall inherit the earth? You know what I'm saying? It's everything the opposite of how we are. The Beatitudes exposes America. Like, all you have to do if somebody says that we're a Christian nation is, how do we match up with the Beatitudes? We don't. Not a single one of them. Principles also, like just loving your enemies, praying for your enemies. We are not like that. the flavor of Christianity that exists here in America is extremely warmongering. Like, we all right with going and bombing Muslims, different people than us. We okay with all of that. In fact, a lot of people almost feel like it's our godly duty to do so. And that's insanity. It goes against everything that we ought to believe. And that's one thing that I think makes me so passionate and always has about this particular issue. I spent a long time really studying out my faith. And I studied a lot of Jewish history as well, because obviously the Bible it all springs from Jewish writings and teachings and culture and ideas. It all just kind of builds on that. And I don't think that this is one thing and this is another. I look at it like it is all one thread of truth woven from cover to cover. This situation just hijacks so many things that I think are beautiful and love and believe. Even the name Zionism, okay? Zion is a beautiful concept. It is a beautiful word. It is magnificent. And it is now has the absolute most negative connotation imaginable attached to it. And I always tell Christians, like, if we strictly went off of what the Bible teaches, and I'm speaking, will probably differ a little bit from Jewish beliefs, but if you were to just base your belief off the Bible as a Christian, and somebody were to say to you, what is Zionism? And you had to just think, okay, well, I would think that Zionism probably just means that it's somebody who believes that there's going to be a marriage of heaven and earth one day. And that's how eternity will play out. The New Jerusalem, Zion, will be formed. And that is where we spend eternity. That's a beautiful concept. That is nothing like the reality of what Zionism has become as a political ideology in the last 100 or so years. It twists so many beautiful truths. And I think that's why the words of the Palestinian Christian leaders who wrote the Kairos Palestine document resonated with me so much when they said that Zionism distorts the image of God in the people that it oppresses, and it distorts the image of God in the Jewish people who embrace it and do the oppressing. It alters what we ought to be in relation to God and others around us in every way. There's no good stewardship about ethnically cleansing a land so that you can move on to it. The Holy Land is only holy in as much as God is in it. God is not in that. God is not in murdering your neighbor. God is not in any of that. So, I don't know. So I got off on a little bit of a tangent.
And what comes up for me hearing that is, for one, I think one big difference between us is like you being a Christian and me being a Jew and scripture and all that is I think the message of the New Testament is that of forgiveness and looking at yourself and taking responsibility for your own sins, forgiving yourself and moving forward. And I think that's a message that the world needs right now, to say, hey, look, as the Christian Zionist movement has corrupted the story and fed us propaganda, we've made mistakes. And we can clean it up. But you said a few things that I want to touch on that are real important. You said that there is one truth that you find from cover to cover. I want to know more about that one truth is, because I think that might be the same truth that I found in the Torah. So could you speak to that more?
It absolutely is, because I found that same truth in the Torah, and it is built upon and expounded on throughout the rest of the Bible. So people usually put Christians into two camps when it comes to how they think about Jews and Israel today. And neither one of these camps really encompass what I believe is the truth from my own studies. One of those camps is the dispensationalists, who believe that, yes, we're God's chosen people as Christians, but they're God's original chosen people, and he has a plan for both of us and all of this stuff. And then they say that the other people are they believe in replacement theology, like Christians replaced the Jews. So we are the Israel now. and that type of stuff. And in the past, there have been times and factions of where they have taken that type of theology and used it in very anti-Semitic ways. So there is truth to that history there. What I believe, though, personally, I believe that there is one people of God. I believe in the Old Testament, in the Torah, I believe the concept there exists, that there are many people called by the name of God, and then there are people who are actually of God. And not everybody who calls themselves a Jew or calls themselves an Israeli or whatever on a spiritual level is that. I think that the entire message of the Bible as a whole, when you look at the Old and New Testaments, is that, for instance, the book of Hebrews in the New Testament, there's a chapter, the Faith Hall of Fame is what a lot of people call it. It's the 11th chapter, I believe, 11th, 12th chapter. I'm a little rusty, sorry. But it starts talking about how by faith, Abraham did this. By faith, David did that. By faith, and it's naming all these Old Testament characters. That's what I believe Jesus' message was. You have all been trying to get close to me by following the law, but that wasn't the law's intention. The law's intention was to show you that no matter how hard you try, you can't meet up my expectations. The good news is that your faith is what brings you close to me. What makes you a child of Abraham is not that you're physically descended from Abraham, it's that you have the faith of Abraham. That is what brings you into the kingdom. That is what makes you part of this spiritual family. That is what grafts you into the inheritance of Israel, as the rest of the New Testament repeatedly talks about. It's not that this group of people replaced that group of people. Even in the Old Testament. And this is another thing that drives me crazy about Christians who think you just have to support everything Israel does. God didn't support everything Israel did. God was their biggest critic. Time and time again, God had to send prophets to the people of Israel to say, hey, you've gotten away from me. It's time to return to me. And when they didn't, God brought down punishment on them for it. And the people who didn't heed those words that caused the judgment to come, those people weren't actually of God. No matter what status they held in Israeli society, no matter who their parents were, none of that mattered. What matters is their faith. That's what I believe is the single thread of truth throughout Scripture. I mean, King David, you can go on and on about all the things that David did to break the law. Yeah, he was a man after God's own heart. What was the difference? Why could he go in here and lie to a priest and eat the showbread because he was hungry and God be okay with it? Why could he commit murder? Why could he do all these things and God still love him the way he did and say that he's a man after my own heart? It's because David had a repentant heart and he had trust in the promise to come. He understood the law can't save me. God is going to provide his own sacrifice. And so for me, Christianity and Judaism, they're two sides of the same coin. People in the Old Testament were looking forward to the promise that God made, that he would provide his own sacrifice, that he would atone for us. We look back on the same thing, and that thing ended up being culminated in Jesus. That's what I believe, in a nutshell, Christians ought to believe. And that is a very different mindset than, we're this group of people to God in this way now, and the Jews are to God in that way now, or we replace the Jews, like the whole paradigm shift. And when you see it that way, I'm able to love my Jewish brothers and sisters, even though in my heart, I want every Jew to come to recognize that Jesus was the Messiah that was promised to them. It's no different than somebody who doesn't know anything about God at all. I'm able to love my Muslim brother and sister because I've learned about Islam now to the point that I understand they're just people whose hearts are set to seeking the same God that we are. Now, we can disagree all day long on different theological issues, What I won't do in that conversation is entertain just all the crazy stuff. Like almost everything that we've been taught about Islam is incorrect. They are a very peaceful religion. They are very loving. And I know many Muslims who live more Christ-like lives than most of the Christians that I know. I'm not necessarily an all roads lead to God type person either. But I believe this at the heart of it all, that if a person has set their heart to wanting to know God, that God will reveal himself to them in his own time and in his own way. I believe, and we're going to agree to disagree about the most fundamental parts of the differences between Christianity and Judaism, which is mainly the identity of Christ. Same as that's the main difference between me and a Muslim. They believe he was a prophet. I believe he was the son of God, God in the flesh. I believe God came down. But when we get past all of that, I feel like I can't live my life to the fullest. I can't enjoy this life. I can't be fruitful in this life the way I'm created to be unless I get in tune with my Creator. And that is the same heart of Judaism, and that is what is at the heart of Islam. And we can all build on that together. We can all respect each other on that basis. And the ways that all of it has been twisted to justify hatred and murder and genocide, it is absolutely despicable. I don't know how anybody can consider themselves a spiritual person, a person who reveres the Torah or the Bible or anything in between, and be okay with what is currently happening in the name of these religions. It is just absolutely abominable.
Here in Bristol, we have a synagogue for Zion's sake, and they're part of the Messianic community. So these are Jews who accept Jesus as the Messiah, and they don't practice like many Christians do, for example, and they don't have their holy day and celebrate together on Sunday. They meet on Shabbat, and they celebrate Saturday morning and afternoon and that kind of thing. And you have a really profound message. If I understand correctly what I'm hearing, it's connecting with, I agree that I think at the core of it, I think that fundamentally, maybe we don't disagree so much. There are some differences, and let's celebrate that. And I think that's part of Jewish tradition too, is that within the Jewish community, you have so many different perspectives. And part of what that looks like, it's like you got the Torah, and then you got the Midrash and the Talmud, or commentary forums. Like what we're doing here today, having these conversations, that's interpretation of Scripture and what it all means. And I appreciate, I think if I understood correctly what you're saying with what the core truth is, it's that we have a chosen people that were given a path. And perhaps we all have a path. And what is that path? That path is a hero's journey. It comes with faith, because it's not an easy path. I don't think that our paths are, when I read Scripture and I see the journey of Moses, when I see the journey of Jacob becoming Israel, when I see the journey of Jesus as the Messiah, it wasn't a path that was easy. Sometimes it ended in tragedy. Sometimes there was violence and hardship along the route, but it was through that faith that you continued on that path. And to me, that's the most compelling story any of us can experience, and a story that belongs in our own hearts and flesh, because that is our story too. And I see that story, I'm a big Star Wars fan. And Luke Skywalker, a small group of committed individuals to take down the Empire. A small group of people like the Appalachian Peace Education Center. We're not a huge group. And you've got, Luke is a farmer. And I try not to fall into delusions of grandeur, but when I look at my own story, I'm like, what has God made for me? Because it feels like me coming into my Hebrew name as Yogev. So the Yogevs were in the Bible at a time after the destruction of the temple, in Jerusalem, and Jews were displaced, and many Jews were pushed to Syria. And there was a group of Jews that stayed in the Holy Land and continued as farmers. So what does Yogev mean? It means somebody who cultivates the earth. But it means more than that. It means somebody who cultivates the earth following the moral code given to us by God for this land. Yogev in Hebrew, it's Yud Vav. It's a little line, a long line, a gimel, and a vet. And it's the growth, it's the cultivation just in the name. And it starts, Yud is the seed letter. Vav is the full line. It's the same beginning of the most holy way of saying God's name. I feel like there's a piece of God that's trying to instruct my life, to provide the wisdom of how to navigate this world. And that's a responsibility that I celebrate. And I see perhaps we all have this hero's journey together, that collectively we have a responsibility to fulfill the prophecy of creating heaven on earth, to build Zion as a place of peace. And that's a choice that we can make. We can bomb the people who live there and do ethnic cleansing and create hell on earth. Or we have an opportunity to live as brothers and sisters, one in humanity, and to celebrate our differences and to live in peace.
In Scripture in the New Testament, when Christ came, most of the Jewish people at that time were living under occupation. They were being oppressed by the Romans, and they interpreted their scriptures to believe that the Messiah that was going to come was going to overthrow their oppressors and reinstate them as this earthly kingdom and all of that. That's what they were looking for. That's how they were interpreting the scriptures. And Christ made it clear that that's not how this is. We were looking for it to be this, but it ended up being this. That's even the story in Revelations. The vision over and over and over. I beheld the lion there, but it was a lamb that came forward and opened the scroll. That's what it's really talking about. We looking at everything thinking it's going to be this, but it ended up being this. And I think it's the same concept for these messianic extremists now. They're all looking for it to be rebuilding a third temple and us having this kingdom on earth and all of this stuff. And that's not what the kingdom of heaven is at all. So yeah, man.
There's a lot of ways that we can follow the right path is with the mezuzah. And the mezuzah is a prayer scroll that Jews, we hang it at the entranceway of doorways. And there was debate from different rabbis about how to hang the mezuzah. And there's a rabbi that says, it must be vertical. You must always hang it vertical, and here's why. And then there's another rabbi who argued that it must be horizontal. It's actually his son who said, no, it must be horizontal. So I do what a lot of Ashkenazi Jews do here in the United States, and I hang my mezuzah diagonally because it's like celebrating that there is validity in both of their arguments and interpretations. And I think that's a cool celebration. And there's a lot of Jews, most Jews in Israel, I see vertical mezuzahs because the difference with Sephardic and Ashkenazi traditions. And it's all good. And for me, like, I'm not doing animal sacrifices on my farm, but I raise goats and I raise cattle. And when we butcher ourselves, or I invite my Muslim brothers who come to the farm and can have access to meat that is processed in a way that is respectful to the animal and in alignment with their religious values, we share ideas. So I give them resources and tools and make sure that they're set up to do how they like to do it. And in that, I can observe and ask questions. And I've actually incorporated where I do more kosher. One of the differences is with kosher, you slaughter animals together because the idea there is that you want them to be comfortable. And sometimes when I'm butchering for, just me and my girlfriend, we don't need a lot of meat, so we might just need one goat. And there's a different practice in Hillel where you do not want the other animals to see what is happening, even animals that are getting butchered at the same time. And I see value in both those arguments. I think there's value in having the comfort of another animal as a herd. Goats are herd animals. There's comfort in those last moments is, I think, really important. Another Hillel practice is you offer them water. And I've always give like a last meal kind of thing. I give them some of their favorite foods right there to make sure that they're in a good place and have as good of a life as possible, even in those last moments. And so now when I butcher, I make sure that none of the other animals observe what's going on so that they can feel comfortable and live a life. And I think that maybe some viewers, or sometimes when I share this with people, it makes people feel uncomfortable or sad, or how can you do that to an animal? And I think it speaks to how the importance of owning and taking responsibility for our lives and our actions. Because as somebody who consumes meat, I see this as a necessity, and I don't close my eyes to the violence and disrespect that may happen from large farms and where practices aren't followed, where animals are respected and such. And to me, perhaps that's that same, hey, we need to open our eyes to the impacts of, we may say the story is we're just helping Israel defend itself, but in reality, what's actually happening, I'm not going to close my eyes to the genocide and the ethnic cleansing that's happening of the Palestinian people. And I want to look at the impacts of all my decisions and take responsibility for doing the best that I can with the wisdom that we're carrying forward from our ancestors.
That was well put, man. I just had this random memory as you were talking about celebrating our differences and whatnot. And I've never looked into this since, so I hope it was accurate. But at one point while I was in prison, for about 4 years, I was at a prison that didn't even have cable. We just had like local, you got the digital antennas, whatever we could pick up on that. Well, for some reason, we could pick up this Korean channel. I have no idea why.
I had anything to broadcast. Korean.
But I mean, it was like there was a lot of like pop stuff going on there. Like it was just, it was very modern and everything, you know what I'm saying? But it was like one Saturday morning. It was just kind of a slow morning. It was wintertime. So like I wasn't about to go to the yard first thing in the morning. It was like 3 feet of snow out. You know what I mean? So just kind of laying there, and I'm skimming through, and they were playing a documentary on that channel about the role of education in different societies. And they were at a library in Israel. And the woman commentating it, and I was reading the subtitles, but she was like, I'm standing here in a library in Israel, and one of the first things you may notice is it's not like most libraries. It's very loud. There's a lot of commotion going on. And she proceeded to walk over to these areas where you basically had a bunch of bookshelves with 2 chairs, and it was like a bunch of stations. And they pointed out how the point here is not for you to come and get lost in a book and study. You need to have at least one person with you. And the idea is that you come here and you learn together and you debate about what you're learning and you share each other's ideas. And that is how you sharpen each other. That is how you broaden your perspective. And I thought that was so beautiful, man. Like that really is how we all ought to be. And the evidence of what happens when that doesn't happen, I think is very evident in the church in America today. Most people live in an echo chamber their whole lives when it comes to the things they believe spiritually. So much so that even if another person who is of the same religion as you introduces new ideas, like I often do to people, you immediately are just defensive, like, oh, whoa, wait a minute. And I think that it hurts us as a society to not be geared towards dialogue on every issue, because that's where people's minds don't change because you show them facts. When it comes to stuff that's deeply ingrained in their worldview, showing somebody some facts usually is not going to just debunk everything and, oh, I'm different now. I understand now that stuff's not true. Nah, people hold on to those core beliefs. What changes those things is relations with other people that break down those things they thought were true. When you meet a person and that person and your own experience with them goes against everything you thought you knew about their people, you're going to look at their people differently now. And that's what we're lacking in a big way. That's what I think a lot of Israelis are lacking. I mean, you hear all these stories like the Israelism documentary, and you hear all these stories, especially from even people that grew up in Israel. And they're like, I never met a Palestinian from the West Bank until like they got older and got curious and went there or something. And then like their whole world was shattered because everything they thought was true, they saw a different reality. So it's even possible to grow up in Israel and not understand what's actually happening around you. Just like it's possible to grow up here in America and not really know. There's been a war on education here for years, but especially since 2020. Like anything you say about Black history now, people are like, oh, that's critical race theory. People don't even know what critical race theory is, first of all, but like, why is it taboo to talk about things that actually are part of our history? Because it goes against and challenges the narrative that you have in your worldview. So even though those things are true, you don't want to hear about them. They make you uncomfortable. They challenge what you think you know. It's the same way with many Israelis. And that transcends all societies and peoples. Like, that's just how we are. If you live in an echo chamber and you don't have that dialogue, you don't hear those differences in opinions, you don't get to know somebody that's different than you, then it's very easy to be manipulated into believing just about anything.
Thank you for taking the conversation. I feel transported to that Israeli library with that Korean reporter, because that's what we're doing right here, right now. And celebrating the faith that we have as spiritual or religious people, that faith is stronger when it's tested and true. When we can hear ideas that challenge that faith and we can talk about it, and at the end of the day, find common ground and find that deeper truth. And that's why I'm going to stay tuned into this show, because that's what this show is doing.
Well, now I really appreciate you coming, man. I appreciate the conversations we're able to have. I appreciate your heart behind it all. And I appreciate that even though we don't agree 100% on everything, we absolutely see where we do align and we stand in solidarity on those things. I appreciate that about you, man. I appreciate that about everybody I've met actually through the Appalachian Peace Education Center. There's people like, most of y'all are from more rural areas than I am even. And the stereotypes that come along with people that are from these areas and stuff. And the members of the Appalachian Peace Education Center just shatters every one of those. I mean, you have everything. Everybody respects each other. I love it. And you guys are actually about taking action. It's not just a bunch of talk. It's not out here fundraising to try to do all these grand things. It's just boots to the ground. What can we do right now? And that's beautiful. That's a beautiful thing. So anybody out there looking to learn more about the Appalachian Peace Education Center, the things they got going on, we'll make sure we link everything here in the description.
If anybody's interested in getting involved with the Appalachian Peace Education Center, go to our website at appalachianpeace.weebly.com. And we're working on adding a calendar of all of our events up there. But it's also a place where you can go on our membership tab and you can sign up to get involved, or click on contact and email us. And would love to connect with each one of you. The Appalachian Peace Education Center, we're a small organization here in rural Southwest Virginia and Northeast Tennessee, but we are a connection to a larger movement, and we work with national coalitions. We work with the Virginia Coalition for Human Rights, which is a statewide organization. Also, just posting on Facebook this week about a victory we had with Kane voting the right way on those joint resolutions. We got a repost from a peace organization in Abingdon, England. And to me, that's an example of how big our movement really is, that we are a piece in something bigger. And I see that as something bigger as global. And I see that as something bigger because I'm drawing from thousands of years of Jewish tradition and all of the faith and purpose and passion that we all bring to the table.
Yeah, and I don't think it can be overstated the impact that the activism of the Appalachian Peace Education Center has had on Senator Tim Kaine's decision in that vote. That's huge, man. Even though it didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things as far as the bill getting passed, even though that didn't happen, the fact that he took a step in the right direction, he went against the grain with his own party, with everybody, to do what he felt like was right and that his constituents wanted, because we made it a point to let them know that's what we wanted. So that's beautiful, man. It is. It's really beautiful. I appreciate you coming again, man. It's always a pleasure talking to you. Hopefully we'll get together on another show here soon. I know you're leaving the country. Safe travels, man. Good luck to you, all of that going on. Look forward to you coming back. All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Love y'all. Stay stirred up. See you again soon.